Rose, author of States of Fantasy, instigates the following question: why and when do most men follow? Upon what inner justification and upon what external means does this domination rest? This is where the delusional fantasy comes to play. She concludes, over and above its monopoly of legitimate violence, the modern state relied on fantasy for the authority that it can neither secure nor ultimately justify. Citizens are subjugated to the state through their belief in the state's authority. It is the state's fantasy that supplies this belief. What is this fantasy that binds the lemmings to their master? It is the masquerade of American exceptionalism. Donald E. P., author of the New American Exceptionalism, argued, the fantasy dimension of this discourse is evident in the fact that U.S. citizens could express their belief that American was exceptional, even though they harbored very different accounts of what that belief means. American exceptionalism has been taken to mean that America is distinctive, meaning merely different, or unique, meaning anomalous, or exemplary, meaning the model for other nations to follow, or that is exempt from the laws of historical process, meaning that it is exemption to the laws and rules governing the development of other nations. If Americans are indoctrinated with the axiom that American is exceptional, why then can't people agree what exactly American exceptionalism is? The answer, my comrades, is deviously simple. Quote, U.S. policymakers depend on the fantasy of American exceptionalism to authorize their practice of government. When one version of American exceptionalism no longer suited extent geopolitical demands, policymakers reconfigured its elements to address the change in geopolitical circumstances. My opponent has already done this. Think about this. He does not affirm the resolution as written. He only affirms it in the borderlands. American exceptionalism no longer fits his paradigm. So in order to convince you to vote for him, he alters the framework of the resolution. If you buy into this, you're buying into the delusional fantasy that is American exceptionalism. You're buying into what the man wants you to do. When it doesn't work anymore, he'll just tell you something different. You'll buy hook, line, and sinker, my friends. Hook, line, and sinker. He already concluded that. He ended his case by saying, you have already affirmed it when you walked into this round. He knew that. He knew you're indoctrinated with American exceptionalism. He's counting on it. He even told you it was going to happen. By brainwashing the American public that America is the city on the hill, or manifest destiny, or the nation of nations, or it's an invincible nation, or whatever the government can justify, borderlands, they can easily justify any clear violation of international law, the just war theory, international treaties, or just bad manners. Despite the inherent contradictions of those foreign policy decisions and American values, the proletariat of America simply labels those of us who question the legality, legitimacy, or viability, even the winnability of a conflict, as un-American. Instead, they cheer the notion of America strapping on its ass-kicking boots, taking aim, and all the consequences be damned. Because they are brainwashed. You are brainwashed. Brenner already told you that. How can we, the bourgeoisie of intellectualism, allow this delusional fantasy to make us bow down to whatever asinine policy the decision that the government makes, affirming in the borderlands? As Rage writes, I got no patience. So sick of compliance with the D, the E, the F, the I, the A, the N, the C, the E. Mind of a revolutionary. So clear the lane, the finger the lands of the claim. What? The land of the free? Whoever told you that was your enemy. We need to draw a line in the sand. We need to reject American exceptionalism because it's only a delusional fantasy used to convince the public that foreign policy disasters are justified and the only viable solution. Peace argues, quote, the fantasy of American exception produced beliefs to which the state has regularly taken exception. The state nevertheless needs the fantasy to solicit its citizens' assent to its monopoly over legitimate uses of violence. The state presupposes this belief when it declared that its power to make and preserve that laws require at times to make exceptions to that law. In recasting Japanese internment, Operation Wetback, and the Vietnam War as exceptions, our government convinces the population, in order to protect our way of life, our values, and our beliefs, we must lock away, profile, subjugate the group of people who really aren't Americans anyway. Sit back and think about this. In the last 10 years, government in our indoctrinated society has come to accept that in order to protect our exceptional ways of life, the government can spy on our phone calls, messages, library books. Members of the government demand that Muslims have the First Amendment right to worship near ground zero, because they're all terrorists anyway. Or they're not really American. Hell, the government can grow our genitals before we fly. We smile, we thank them for their service, and we get on the plane. Rage continues to rise. Come on. Yes, I know my enemies. They're the teachers who taught me to fight, compromise, conformity, assimilation, submission, ignorance, hypocrisy, brutality, the elite. All of which are American dreams. It is up to you to stand up to this brainwashing, to this indoctrination that is handed down in our classrooms by our teachers. Remember, all public teachers are legally required to teach you that America is great, America is awesome. And if you disbelieve that, you're un-American. Remember this, I'll leave you with this final thought. Who controls the past now controls the future. Who controls the present now controls the past. Who controls the past now controls the future. Who controls the present now? I'll leave that up to you. Thank you. Now let's cross the line.
Understand everything he said. I actually made sense. But,
Yes, sir. There you go. Okay, so my first question is, so your advocacy is that you want these fine, young, mostly young men and women in the room to vote negative. That's what you're saying, right?
Correct. That is what we have to do.
You want them to reject American exceptionalism.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if they sign the ballot for the negative, like how does that strike a blow against American exceptionalism? What does the ballot mean in debate?
In this instance, I'm arguing this is the first step against indoctrination. As my opening quote says, it has to start somewhere. It has to start sometime. What better place?
Yeah, what better time than now? So that's why. Yeah. My next question would be like, so we all signed out negative, okay, and we walked out of the room, right?
Yes, sir.
This is going what changed?
We have now put the thought in these young minds.
Okay, so you thought American exceptionalism is bad. That's the thought we put in their minds.
Yes, sir.
Hey, everybody, American exceptionalism is bad. Okay, do some vote negative? Like, I agree. You should all know American exceptionalism is a really bad thing. Why do they have to vote negative?
Because we have to draw a line in the sand.
Okay, cool. So I guess my next question would be, you mentioned education. So your argument would be that like teachers sort of reproduce or reify, reload the notions of American exceptionalism.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, like, how does affirming in the borderlands, understanding that we are all complicit in American exceptionalism? You're right. I do tell all of these young men and women that they are, to a certain degree, brainwashed, as am I, as are you, by American exceptionalism. Sorry, it's the truth, right? But, like, why, if we accept that, I mean, why does that, like, reify state power?
Because we're teaching now to question authority.
Okay. So voting negative, like, symbolizes questioning authority.
Yeah, I'll agree with that statement.
Okay, that's fine. And then, like, are you essentially agreeing for the most part on my definition of American exceptionalism, or like, do you have a separate way that's functionally different of defining it?
I will agree with it, but what I presented in there, I was just saying we have different definitions, and there's no problem with your definition.
Right on. Okay, cool. Let's see. I'm good. Thanks. I don't need any